This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. Our show is brought to you by Mac's List and by our book, Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond. To learn more about the brand new edition, now available for the first time in print and Kindle, visit maxlist.org/ebook. Say the word creativity, and the first job that comes to mind may be artist. Or you may think of writers, actors, or designers. But whatever the occupation, one of the most valuable gifts each of us has is our creativity. Every day we bring to our jobs unique talents and ideas that nobody else has. When we have the opportunity to put that creativity to good use, our work becomes more rewarding and our employers and the customers we serve benefit. This week on Find Your Dream Job, we're talking about creative careers. Later in the show, I'll speak to Cory Huff, founder of the website theabundantartist.com, about the hidden path to creative careers. But whether you're an artist or just need to share work samples, Ben Forstag has a photo editing tool you'll want to check out, and Cecilia Bianco has a question from a listener. Let's first check in with the Mac's List team. Cecilia, Ben, when you two think about creative careers, what's the number one barrier you see people encounter?
I think when people are first breaking into the creative industry, they're not as prepared as they should be as far as samples of their work. And so building that up before you start job searching is something that I've talked to a lot of people about.
I'd say there's two. One is talent isn't always good enough. A lot of success depends on the networks you build. So you can't just paint a pretty picture or have a great writing sample, put it online, expect business to come to you. You have to go out there and build the connections, do the groundwork so that you can sell your creative services to others. The other one I'd say, and this is more of a structural issue in the economy right now, is a lot of creative services have become commoditized, where creative artists are competing against each other for different kind of contracts, which really pushes prices down. And I think to some extent devalues what those folks bring to the marketplace. And those are just challenges that people in the creative space need to look at.
I would agree with both of you. And I think a key point, and we'll hear more about this from Cory later in the show, is mindset. And it's thinking about, if you are pursuing a creative career, that you need to think about the business of doing that, whether it's how you approach your job or whether you go out and work for yourself. You don't have to accept the idea that following a creative career means that you have to take a vow of poverty. Well, let's check in with Ben, who every week is out there exploring the internet, looking for tools that you can use in your job and in your career. Ben, what have you discovered for us this week?
So this week I want to share a free and very powerful photo editing tool called Pixlr. That's spelled Pixlr, and it's available at the aptly named URL pixlr.com. I think this is a great tool for two different reasons. One is it provides a platform for training. If you're not really good at photo editing or graphic design, this is a free tool you can use to get some experience in that area. Second, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later on, this is a tool you can use to help with your actual job search. We've all heard of Photoshop, which many creative professionals use, and even many people outside of the traditional creative sector use this tool to edit, crop, enhance, and modify photos. Photoshop is a fantastic tool. I use it almost every day.
I do too, Ben, and it's funny that you're talking about Pixlr because before I had access to Photoshop, I always used Pixlr.
That's right. So I'm talking about Photoshop as a segue into Pixlr, because the downside with Photoshop is it's expensive. You have to pay for it. Pixlr is the poor man's Photoshop, where it's free, but you're not compromising a whole lot of functionality. Pixlr is a free web-based app. It allows you to open, edit, and save photos, both from your own computer and those you find online. In terms of the layout, it looks and feels a lot like Photoshop. And I'd say it includes about 80% of the functionality you'd find in Photoshop, which for most folks is still more than enough. It's a really solid tool, and it's been around for several years. And I've noticed that the developers continue to make improvements and upgrades. And of course, the price is right.
So, Ben, how do you think people can use Pixlr in their, whether they're looking for work or in managing their career?
So you can use Pixlr for just about any photo. or simple graphic design project. You can also use it to learn new employment skills. For example, if you're not familiar with Photoshop and don't want to go spend the $300 to get the license, you can use Pixlr as a proxy training tool. Again, it's amazing how similar the two products are, how they look and they feel and they operate. So Pixlr is a great way to familiar yourself with basically the operations of Photoshop. Also, there's always a need to crop and resize images when you're dealing with social media and your profiles on social media. This is particularly true when you're dealing with profile photos, and Pixlr is a great tool for doing that. It's quick, easy, and free.
We do have a future show coming up where we're going to dive into LinkedIn profiles, and a tool like this can be very helpful in making your page look as professional as possible.
Exactly. So I would encourage everyone to check this out. It's pixlr.com, Pixlr.com. Well,
great stuff, Ben. If you have an idea for Ben, we'd love to hear from you. You can write him directly at his email address, which is ben@maxlist.org. Now let's turn to you, our listeners. Cecilia Bianco, our community manager, is sorting through messages from you that come in all kinds of ways. Cecilia, what do you have for us this week?
So this week, a reader wrote in and said, I really want to work for a specific company. I'm thinking about taking a lower level job to get my foot in the door in hopes I'll be able to move into the job I want. Is this a good idea? And I think this is a great thing, but you just have to be clear with the employer about your goals to eventually be in a different role and make sure that this job that you're accepting is a good first step in that direction. You want to be strategic about how you're framing your goal to the employer so you're not giving off the vibe that you're just accepting this job to get in with the company. You want to explain that you're excited to learn and grow in this specific role because your ultimate goal for your career is to end up in X job, whatever that might be. From the people I've talked to in my own experiences, it can be a lot easier to get hired and move up through promotions rather than applying for a higher level, because once you know and understand the company's culture, its values, the people that work for the company, its products and markets, you're in a much better position to move up. And if you take a lower level job and do really well, you'll hopefully be able to quickly get a promotion, which is obviously ideal. You just want to be careful because if you start too low at the company or in a department too different from where you want to be, it could take a frustrating amount of time to get into the right role. So just consider how large the gap is between the job you're accepting and the job you actually want. Mac and Ben, what do you think about this? Have either of you ever used this tactic?
I've never actually used this tactic, but I really like your suggestion about talking to the prospective employer and saying what your goals are. I know when I talk to people applying for jobs, I always say, what is your career goal in 5 years or 10 years? Because most of the time I don't anticipate that the job I'm offering them is the end of their career, right? That this is the place they want to be in 40 years. So it's good to know where they want to go, and that gives me an idea as the prospective employer if I can deliver on what they're looking for with the current job and the opportunities in the organization at large, and it lets that person know whether they're going to get what they're looking for if they come and join the organization.
I have used this technique. Back in the 1990s, one of my goals was to have a communications job with the governor of Oregon. And I applied twice, Cecilia, for positions with the governor. I had interviews, but I didn't get those jobs. Then I was offered a 10-week temporary assignment filling in for the deputy communications director. And I left a permanent state job to take that position, and I ended up staying with the governor for 3 years. But I needed to get my foot in the door and to show what I could do. And I also took a pay cut to do it. My wife was a good soldier about putting up with that. But it did pay off. So I went into it with eyes wide open and no guarantees that it would lead to other opportunities. But I thought, and this proved to be the case, that if I could get my foot in the door and show what I could do, they would ask me to stay.
Yeah, so it can definitely be a good move. If you do decide to take a lower job, it's important to set a time frame for yourself to either get a promotion or meet milestone goals within the company, because you don't want to get stuck in this lower level job for too long, which can make it harder to find a job elsewhere. And obviously the alternate choice would be to find a position more suited to what you want at a different company while you continue to make connections and network within this dream company, which is also a good strategy. But if the company in question is a hard place to get into, it might be a longer road ahead, as you found out with your experience.
Well, good advice, Cecilia. Thank you. If you have a question for us, please email communitymanager@maxlist.org, and we may feature your question on our next show. These segments by Ben and Cecilia are sponsored by the 2016 edition of Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond. Now, for the first time, you can read Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond on your Kindle, Nook, or iPad. You can also order a paperback edition. Whatever the format, our goal is the same, to give you the tools and tips you need to find meaningful work. For more information, visit maxlist.org/ebook and sign up for our ebook newsletter. We'll send you publication updates, share exclusive book content, and provide you with special prices. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Cory Huff. Cory Huff teaches visual artists how to make a living from their creative work by selling their art online. His company, The Abundant Artist, has helped hundreds of independent artists all over the world turn their dreams into reality. Cory is also an active performance artist and photographer. Cory, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mac.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here in the studio, face-to-face. So, Cory, we're talking about creative careers, and let's start with some of the common myths. The biggest one out there is the starving artist.
Sure.
We all probably have parents or friends or family who says, you want to be a writer, you want to be an actor, you're going to end up living in a garret. What do you say to people who think a creative career means a life of poverty?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start by sharing one of my favorite stories from the last couple centuries. There's a guy named Henry Murger. And Henry was a writer in Paris in the early 1800s, and he wrote a book called A Day in the Life of the Bohemian. And the book is about these Bohemian students that lived in the Latin Quarter in Paris, and they would get up in the morning and they would, call themselves artists, and they would go out to the cafes and they would talk to their other artist friends, and they would spend a lot of time talking about being artists, but they didn't actually make any money. And the reason they didn't make any money is because they weren't actually putting in the work. They were just sitting around talking about being artists. And the funny thing about this book is the book became immensely popular. We're talking French aristocracy coming down to the Latin Quarter and slumming with the Bohemians, dressing like them because it was cool and trendy to do so, to look like they were poor. And so artists suddenly became, like being a poor artist suddenly became this cool, hip thing to do. And that inspired a play called A Day in the Life of the Bohemian, which became the opera La Boheme, which was the inspiration for the musical Rent. And so you can see this idea of the starving artist being the ideal situation proliferating through Western culture. And there's lots of other examples like Murger's book. The funny thing is, in the intro to the book, Murger says, this is not the ideal lifestyle. This is a work of fiction about people who don't do the work necessary to become an artist. And if you stay in this place, you're either going to end up dead or in the Hotel Dieu, which is the insane asylum. So even Murger, who wrote this book, recognized that being a starving artist is a stage that you go through when you're becoming an artist. Just like any other career, you start out working for jobs that don't pay very much, doing freelance gigs that don't pay very much, and you work your way up to better and better gigs and jobs.
Let's talk about the path to a creative career. What's the first step that people have to take in order not to be, and this is a phrase I picked up in grad school, an artist manqué, somebody who pretends that being an artist, but actually, as you say, doesn't do the work.
Right, or a dilettante. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to say it.
Right.
The first step is getting training. And for a lot of artists, that means going to art school. But for a lot of artists, it doesn't mean going to art school. It's just getting whatever training is necessary, whether you go to an atelier or you just pick up a bunch of books. There's even artists who just study on their own and just learn it, figure it out on their own, spending hours and hours in the studio. Whatever it is, you need to build up your skills as an artist, and then you build up a body of work. And that just means having an idea, taking an idea that you care about and exploring it from a creative artistic standpoint until you've reached into all of the different parts of that idea and expressed them.
So for people who aren't pursuing art as a full-time occupation, but they're writers, designers, and they're looking for day jobs, are there any differences in that path?
I don't think so. I think when we talk about day jobs, if you're a graphic designer, for example, you are going to be asked to have the ability to express the ideas for whatever brand is paying you. As a graphic designer, as a creative person, you need to understand what it means to take an idea and express it to its fullest extent, to take those ideas out to whatever their ultimate expression is going to be. And whether that is in writing or graphic design or fine art, whatever that is, you need to be capable of doing something like that. Whenever I hire a graphic designer or a creative in my business, I'm always looking for somebody who is actively exploring those ideas outside of paid freelance gigs or paid gigs. People who care so much about whatever their creative expression is that they're working on it outside of what they're getting paid to do.
So for some creatives, the word business is either it's a mystery or perhaps a dirty word. Why do you think that creative people, whether they're full-time artists or people working inside businesses or organizations, should think more about the business of art?
Well, I think business became a dirty word because of things like Merger's book, right? Where we lionize the dilettante artist, or we lionize the starving artist and say, well, that person is great. But business is simply, at its heart, it's just an exchange of value. It's saying, I have a thing that you want, you have a thing that I want, let's trade. And in contemporary society, that's usually money. I have a skill, you give me some money for that skill or that time. So understanding the basics of what business is so that you can best leverage your abilities and skills and get the most out of it you can, that's the heart of it.
One of the things that's striking about the art world is there's an idea that you need to be anointed or picked. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. There's a couple ways. So there's art galleries that operate sort of at a very high level. They sell individual pieces of art for 6 or 7 figures or more. There's auction houses that sell art on the secondary market for tremendous sums of money. And those things get in the paper, right? They end up in the news. They end up in the New York Times and on the evening news and all that kind of stuff. And that's what gets talked about in the day-to-day life of people who don't know a lot about the art world. And so artists want that. They want to sell their work for 6 or 7 figures. And also those galleries and auction houses, quite often they're the ones that get talked about by the art critics and by the academics. But there's a whole other world of professional artists, and I'm not just talking about painters and sculptors and stuff, I'm talking about musicians. This applies to every form of creative expression. There's an upper echelon that makes the news, and then there's this whole other world of the day-to-day working artist. And there's thousands and thousands of those day-to-day working creatives who make a great living doing what they do, but they don't necessarily make the news.
They're not in the paper. They're not getting calls from galleries, but they're making a living. How do they do that, Cory?
That's a great question. So in my experience for the artists that I work with, they have a small group of very loyal followers. I'll give you an example. There's an artist here in Portland, Oregon, actually, a good friend of mine. His name's Matt Richards. He runs his studio is called Echo Studios, EKKO. And Matt's studio, he makes these amazing mobiles, these 30, 40-foot across mobiles that are just incredible. And he started 15 years ago selling these mobiles, small versions, on eBay. And by selling them on eBay, some art enthusiasts and art directors for construction projects started getting into his work by just organically discovering it on eBay. And some of these art directors started approaching him and saying, well, can you make bigger pieces for this new corporate headquarters that we're going to do, or this movie that we're going to shoot, or this private collector is looking for a piece in his mansion in Dubai. And so, these organic connections happen, and his business just grew and grew over the course of 15 years. Now, he's actually been featured in a few magazines, but he's never been on the news. He's not famous. But he has a very, very good business selling these mobiles, and he's sort of expanded it out from there, from the individual commission pieces. He's got some retail pieces that sell in museum stores and things like that. But in the beginning, it was simply selling pieces on eBay and then retaining the contact information for all of those individual buyers and maintaining relationships with them either by phone or email or whatever, just being in regular contact with those people, seeing who needs work when, and just maintaining that relationship like a good business person does.
Okay, so some of the steps on that path to a creative career include don't wait to be picked, build networks, and keep track of your customers and pay attention to relationships. Cory, what difference can having allies and partners make along the way?
It's a huge difference. So I mentioned he made connections with some art directors, right? And these art directors are people who they get hired by a construction company, and the client is building a new corporate headquarters, and they want their lobby to be really impressive, right? So these art directors look around and they look at their network of creatives and they say, well, okay, what can we put on the wall? What can we put on the ceiling? What kind of music can we play in this lobby? And they want to create an experience in there. So the art director will come to Matt, my buddy, and say, hey, can you make a piece that fits these parameters, and how much does it cost? And he will give them a quote and say, here's the timeline for it. And he's got all that sort of figured out because he's been doing it for a while. And that's how the business works.
Great advice. And then if business can be a dirty word for some artists, a lot of artists also are afraid of marketing. Let's talk about marketing and why many artists and creatives have an allergic reaction to it, and why they should pay attention to it.
It's really interesting because I'm teaching a class right now. In the class, I'm asking artists to look at what makes your creative thing, sets you apart from everybody else in the world. I'm not asking them to go out and market themselves. I'm just saying, let's examine that, what sets you apart. And that's what marketing is at the heart of it. And most creatives haven't taken the time to figure out what sets them apart from others. And most of the time, what differentiates an artist from other people, from other artists whose work is similar, is whatever the emotional impetus is for making the art that they make. And you only can know that by spending some time in introspection. There's this great quote from Matisse where he says that he looked back at his body of work midway through his career. He looked back at his body of work, and what he initially saw as repetition. He said, this is just mindless repetition all throughout all of my individual pieces. He eventually realized was actually the thing that made his work Matisse. And he realized that it was his personality coming out in his work. And I think that holds true. You look at certain graphic designers and you say, I know who that graphic designer is. There's a couple of web designers that I go, man, I know that guy. Like, that site was done by so-and-so. Or musicians who, Chris Cornell is an example of a musician that I love. And every band that he's been in, I listen to and go, man, I love the way that he approaches that music. And he's been in like 6 bands. That thing that makes you unique, whether it's a flaw or a perceived flaw, that's the thing that makes you unique and makes your work unique. And it's the thing that you actually need to embrace and steer into rather than try to avoid, which is the mistake that a lot of artists make. So when it comes to marketing and figuring out, well, why do I hate marketing so much and why do I not want to do marketing so much? I think it comes from a deep-seated discomfort with understanding who you are and being able to communicate why you're different to other people.
Okay, so know your differences, and that will help you along the way of that path to that creative career. Well, this has been a great conversation, Cory. What are some other points you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Whether you choose to go to work for yourself or you choose to go work for somebody else and employ your creative skills that way, it's possible. Don't listen to the negative voices. Look at the people who are actively doing it and listen to what they're saying and what they're doing, and ignore everybody else. Ignore the critics.
And there's certainly many, many people who are doing it. In doing research for this episode, I discovered there are 1.4 million working artists in the United States today, and there are many, many other people in creative occupations. So it is possible. Well, Cory, what's coming up next for you?
Well, we've got 2 big things. One is my book. It's called How to Sell Your Art Online, and it comes out from HarperCollins in June. The physical copy comes out in June. You can pre-order it now at Amazon. You can actually download the Kindle version now, so I'm excited about that. We just put that out this week. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. And then in July of this year, we have the Abundant Artist Conference, where we're going to host about 300 artists from all different stages of career here in Portland. And we're going to have a bunch of artists who have 6- and 7-figure art businesses come and talk on stage about how they got to where they are. And we're going to hopefully leave all of the artists who come with a plan for the next 3 to 6 months of their careers so they know exactly what they need to do.
Well, that's terrific. We'll be sure to include links to both of those, the book and the conference, in the show notes. To learn more about Cory and his work and the new book coming out later this year, or available now on Kindle on Amazon, visit theabundantartist.com. Cory, thanks for joining us in the studio.
Thanks so much, Mac.
We're back in the studio. Ben, Cecilia, what were the most important points you heard Cory make?
I loved his points about business and marketing. He simplified what they really are. Business as an exchange of value and just focusing on that alone rather than some of the other ideas about business that can be scary. And marketing, I liked how he just simplified it to focusing on what sets you apart and then embracing that and being able to sell that to others.
Yeah, I think being clear about your difference and celebrating that difference gives you a huge advantage over with other artists or other job seekers.
Yeah.
I liked his point about not waiting to be picked. You know, I think a lot of people dream of like the big career where they're the international celebrity artist or they're the rock star musician. And some people have that, but that's obviously not going to be the career for every artist. Even if that's the case, you can still make a good living through art. And it reminded me of some friends of mine in Cleveland, Ohio, who they're not household names, but they make a solid living as backup musicians for different bands. He supports his family doing that, and it's a good, solid, reliable career. And he's doing what he loves.
I think stepping forward and chasing your goal, whatever it may be, whether it's art or some other occupation, gives you a big advantage. So, well, great. Well, thank you both, and thank you all for listening. We'll be back next Wednesday with more tools and tips you can use to find your dream job. In the meantime, if you like what you hear on the show, please help us by leaving a review and a rating at iTunes. This helps improve our standings on the iTunes rankings and helps other people discover the show. We've had several new reviews, and Ben and I are going to share them. The first one is from Solar Engineer, who writes, I recommend this podcast for its beneficial blend of advice from professionals, its anecdotes, well-researched tools and resources, and spot-on subject matter. Each episode has provided useful tips which have positively enhanced my job search. Thanks, Mac, Cecilia, Ben, and all the many insightful contributors. Thank you, Solar Engineer. And Ben, you have one to share with us?
Sure. This one comes from Ian T. Davidson, who writes, I'm a young professional on the job hunt, and this podcast is perfect for my needs and fills a knowledge gap I didn't realize I had. Thank you for your nice words, Ian, and let us know how you're doing on that job hunt.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ian and Solar Engineer, and thank you all for listening. Join us next week.